Nobody's telling you the truth about the truck market, so I'm going to have to do that. Where you have car manufacturers saying, we haven't taken into account to the inflationary increases year over year, 3, 4, 5% year over year. That's how truck prices have gotten to where they're at. Yet consumers are saying, no, I don't have the buying power. I don't make as much. The differential between my earnings and the truck prices have escalated to a point where I can't afford anything. Well, I'm going to dispute all of that. I'm going to share the knowledge because I've done a study and an analysis of 3 of the big car manufacturers, Chevy, Ford, as well as Ram. And I'm going to look at some of the most promising classic vehicles, most popular models that a lot of us enjoy today. I'm going to take this back, look 2025 and go back to 2015. I'm going to write the numbers, pull out the MSRP on a similarly equipped extended cab 4x4 and same model base price. So I'm going to take those numbers, adjust for the inflation, because now I've also incorporated the US adjustment, calculator adjustment, and I'm going to blend those numbers and tell you how much they have actually gone up, gone down, or actually have they stayed the same. And maybe we're all just crying the blues and making a mountain out of a molehill. So definitely let's get into this. Let's take this from the top. I'm not going to beat around the bush. Let's start with one of our favorites, the Ford F-150. So let's talk about back in 2015 when Ford came out. They had a Lariat 4x4 Super Crew 4x cruise cab. Of course, back then they had aluminum, 5.5-foot bed, 4-wheel drive. They had a lot of amenities. Well, we know in the last few years we've seen some big changes, bigger screens, more interesting infotainment systems. We know that there have been some increases in tech. And we also know that back in 2015, those trucks were actually stickered around $39,880. But similarly equipped, if you bumped it up and put really almost everything you could back then, a Ford F-150 Lariat 4x4 crew cab with a 5.5-foot bed was stickering around $45,390. Now let's expand on this and say, well, where are we at today? How much is that truck today, a similarly equipped? Well, let's look at the brand new 2025 Ford F-150 Lariat 4x4 Super Crew, or the crew cab, now with the 5.5-foot bed, and we know there's a few extra widgets, but ultimately it hasn't changed that much. The engines haven't changed a lot, and some would actually say they've gone more modular and combined more parts. Instead of having individual parts, Ford has been known to actually cut down the number of individual parts and create more modularity, thus increasing their savings at the factory and saving money. Are they passing those savings down to you, the consumer? Well, brand new in 2025 base price is about $64,000 in US funds. Clearly that's gone up a significant amount. But when you incorporate inflationary increases and you look at compare from 2015 to 2025 and you look at overall the cumulative rate of inflation between these last 10 years, we've seen an increase of 36.3%. Yeah, a third we've gone up in the last 10 years. So now when you increase for inflation, that 2015 model year should have actually stickered based on the current inflation rates gone up to $45,000. Well, we've seen some changes since then now, haven't we? That actually puts us at a pretty significant disadvantage in 2025 because when we actually look at the numbers, it's gone up 25% in the Ford space. So if you wanted to buy a Lariat 4x4 Crew back in 2015, you actually had 25% more bargaining power and buying power back then than you do today. Not only that, we know that most of us haven't kept up with inflation. So while you've also lost 25% of your buying power in the last 10 years, you've probably actually lost more like 40 to 50% because everything else has gone up by more than that. You haven't kept up in your wages. Most people haven't kept up. And you know, when inflation goes up by 3 to 4% year over year, that more likely most people are only getting raises, if at all, 2 to 3%. So in actuality, we're losing ground. We're not even talking about vehicles like the Raptor, but we are talking about the fact that Ford has grossly increased their prices year over year to the point where we're seeing a 25% bump above adjusting for inflation. So Ford's making money hand over fist. Now let's take this to the next one. Is Chevy doing the same thing? Well, Chevy's kind of taken a little bit of a different approach. When I look back in 2015, we talk about a Chevy Silverado 1500 LTZ, LTZ, 4x4 crew cab, well equipped. had a pretty significant base price, but it seemed that they were a little bit more affordable. You could get that truck back then, according to Edmunds, for about $41,295. But what is that Ford LTZ today? A 1500 in 2025 with the 4x4 crew cab lists now for $59,900, or about $60,000. And it sounds like a big jump, doesn't it? That's because it is. But the LTZ trim is designed to get a little more off-roading. They give you nicer all-terrain tires. They give you a better off-road suspension system. And certainly it's just a nicer truck all the way around. So an LTZ is a nice mid-level off-road type rig, and a very popular one at that. So we've seen a significant increase. How much, in fact? Well, adjusting for inflation, we've gone up to about $56,284, when in actuality, the reality was we're at $59,000. So they're up about $4,000 or $5,000 in the last 10 years above the inflationary increases. What does that put you at? Well, Chevy's done their math and they've given you about, or clawed back 10% of your bargaining power. That's right. You're seeing about a 10.25% increase above the inflationary increases, which again, we're following short of that. I don't know about you, but I know my personal wages haven't kept followed suit with any of these changes in inflation, food, housing, travel costs. It doesn't matter what corner of the sector and industry we look at, or the economy we look at, everything's gone up in price except our wages. And so even Ford has exceeded inflation rates by as much as 10%. Okay, they're a little bit closer to, the target. Now, what about Ram? We know Stellantis is really, in our own personal opinion, taken advantage. Since Carlos Tavares back, a few short years ago, he came in there. He wanted to go pure electrification. The idea was to transition the entire lineup, both Rams, Dodge, Chrysler, Jeeps, everything. They wanted to go full in. And we're seeing the Chargers have been toilet. We've seen the Jeep Recon more or less get shelved. Or, any of their full-size Jeeps or Dodge products, that have gone EV have really failed miserably. But a lot of that, of course, had to be subsidized. So they increased their prices. They jacked up their prices on their ICE vehicles. Their trucks are some of their bigger selling products. And essentially, the Ram was the baseline for Stellantis. If it weren't for Ram and Jeep, they wouldn't have a business. So they were taking advantage where they could. And so I look at the Rams, and I'm just going to point this straight out. So anybody disputing what's going on in the industry and the truck market, trust me, I'm giving it to you straight. So again, if you like this information, don't forget to subscribe. Please do share this information with your buddies, because I know you've got a friend or a cousin or an uncle or an aunt that's maybe thinking about buying a new truck. If they think they're getting screwed, guess what? You're going to want to share this video with them. So give it a thumbs up, like, and share. But moving on to Rams, a 2015 Ram. 1500 Laramie 4x4 crew cab. Way back then, according to Car Gurus, those vehicles stickered for about $39,035. Okay, it actually sounds like a pretty good deal by today's standards. $39,000 for a Laramie, pretty much a loaded up half-ton Ram. That doesn't sound like a bad deal. Anyway, now we fast forward. 2025 is a whole new game. And after all this Carlos Tavares mess and all these increases and these price gouging that we've seen across the industry, what we've seen now in 2025, the Ram 1500 Laramie 4x4 crew cab, according to Kelley Blue Book, now has gone up to $62,125. Pretty big, sizable jump, wouldn't you say? But with that said, we're looking at basing the calculated ratio or the number based on what's coming out of the inflationary adjustments based on this U.S. calculator, the U.S. inflation calculator, took us from that initial $39,000 based on the 36.3% inflationary increase in the last, 10 years. We've seen it should be at $53,203. It should be at $53,000. But it's not at $53,000. It's at $62,000. So as we can see, that's about a $9,000 difference. Again, here we have another manufacturer taking full advantage of the consumer and claiming it's all about inflation when we know, in fact, it has nothing to do or very little bit. Inflation is playing a role, absolutely. But now we're looking at Stellantis and Ram actually jacking their prices above the adjusted inflationary rate, another further 17% above. So between, Ford being 25%, Ram being 17%, yeah, it's no wonder we can't afford these trucks. It's no wonder the affordability of these vehicles is pretty much gone bye-bye. Between the fact that we have less income available for spending on these new vehicles, it's no shock that more and more people are struggling with making their payments, or the banks are enabling this and they're allowing longer loan terms. 84 months, 96 months. It's getting you into a long loan term, but most of those that are taking those long loan terms are a negative equity. So then 3 or 4 years rolls down, you want to trade it in again because you've got some miles, and now you're finding that not only the value of that vehicle has dropped off, but the amount that you owe to the bank is actually sizably more than the value of that vehicle upon trade-in. In other words, you might have to cough up another $7,000 or $8,000 just to walk out of that vehicle and trade into your next one. So negative equity's kind of a B-otch. And to be honest with you, things just aren't shaping up all that well. The price increase of a lot of these vehicles, and there's no way that most consumers are saying, yeah, I'm okay with that bigger screen. Yeah, that makes sense why you're charging $9,000 over sticker, because you gave me that bigger screen and you gave me a fancier little center console. Yeah, that's worth the money. Yeah, most consumers really aren't good with that. So ultimately, that is the functional truth of what's going on in the truck industry. Nobody's really talking about this, not in this depth. And I wanted to do a true market analysis and share with you how bad we are actually getting hosed in the truck market. Anyway, hope to see each and every one of you. Don't forget to check out those hot videos. You're going to love it. See you all real soon. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.